Okay. I'm back. What's up, guys? Sorry I've been gone for a few days. Um, but I'm here. Let's set this up on my desktop. And as as I have been doing for the past several weeks, I will be, just watching along to YouTube videos until the conversation picks up. And if it doesn't, well, you can enjoy me just reacting to videos.
Want to create engaging promo videos but don't know where to start?
Well,
Canva's
it
drag
might
and
help
drop
if I actually
function
turn
makes
my
it easy to use.
desktop on.
Plus, the new layered timeline to make trimming and syncing clips,
Uh,
music, and more a breeze.
I
Try
did the
it
boomer
today.
thing. Why isn't it on?
Live your biggest life in the new GMC Acadia. Get 2.9% APR on 2026 Acadia models. Plus, get $750 purchase allowance when you finance through GM Financial.
What's up, guys? Welcome to my YouTube series. Today I don't have coffee because I already drank it, but I had a thought and I wanted to share it with you guys. So,
I want to. I think I'm gonna reposition this.
I think that more men should actually abandon their kids. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Pearl, that's so evil, that's so terrible, but hear me out. We have an entire social infrastructure in place that allows women to keep making and enabling bad decisions. So I'll give you an example. A woman can be a terrible wife and go to marriage counseling and then be told she's doing great and it's the husband's problem. On top of that, I know a guy who has his single mother sister living with him, and he allows her to like boss him around. So not only is he bailing her out of her bad choice of being a single mother, um, he also allows her to boss him around, and like men just want to keep the peace. And I thought about it, and there's this narrative that there's a lot of deadbeat dads out there. And the more I did this divorce documentary, so for those of you that don't know, I interviewed 1,000 people and found out that a lot of the things they tell us is true about society isn't. And one of those is that most deadbeat fathers are actually deadbeat mothers. It's mothers that stole the kids from the dad. And most dads I know actually don't really give a shit about the money. All they want is their children. And they go to court and they fight and they fight and they fight. And I have one friend in particular that is fighting for his kids currently. And I told him to stop fighting and just let her have them. And when men hear this, they kind of, it's very difficult because I know how much men like love their kids. And I'm not saying to not go to court, but I would just accept whatever the court gives you. Because you're going to spend all this time, all this money fighting for your kids just for her to get custody anyway, most likely, right? So why
She's
even
not
let
wrong.
her have them? And I actually think if more men had this mindset, more women, because women always say men abandon their kids and they don't. But what if they did?
Here's the better
What if they
idea.
said, hey,
Don't get
you made the
married
choice to be a single
in
mom.
America.
You broke up the family. You need to accept the consequences is that if you want primary custody, I'm not going to be involved. You only get me being involved in my health if I get primary custody. And I think if more men stood on that, there would be more women that actually gave up custody. Because the problem is women get to have their cake and eat it too. Um, and this kind of goes even deeper because the families enable and allow this. Because a lot of single mothers, the only reason they can be single mothers is because they have their families help with their children. And there needs to be more families that tell their daughter, no, you are a single mom, deal with it. I'm not going to help you fix your house. I'm not going to help you raise your kid. You made this choice, deal with it. Deal with it. But
Wouldn't
instead,
be
the
happening in
brothers
this
come in,
family.
the fathers come in, and there's an entire social infrastructure in place to help with the kids. And I think it's difficult for people. We do have a lot of empathy because, the kids are the ones that suffer.
This whole
But it's
this
kind of
whole
the same
household
issue we have in society.
caters
It almost
to
would be
one
better
derelict
if we just
parent.
gave women all the voting power.
and
and
it's
men
not
didn't
me,
vote at
so
all
I don't
for the
have
next
kids.
5 years and said, you want power? Good luck. You want to be CEOs? Good luck. Here you go. Because it's not until women have the power and fail with it that people start giving up like the power that comes with it. But the issue is that too many women get to have their cake and eat it too. I think that's why people hate e-girls, right? Because Candace Owens, for example, is a woman that has her
I
cake.
still don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what an e-girl is. I thought that was just, I don't know whether that was an influencer, someone who does OnlyFans.
But the issue is that too many women get to have their cake and eat it too. I think that's why people hate e-girls, right? Because Candace Owens, for example, is a woman that has her cake and is eating it too. You know,
Chicken Palooza is back. Chicken meals on a water for just $6. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast.
You might be underestimating me. That wouldn't be the first time. The big drug companies and hospital monopolies.
My name is Taranika. I'm based here in the Bronx in New York City. I actually moved here from Grenada, and I am stuck.
because it's one thing to be a career woman and not have kids. That's kind of like the consequence, right? It's another thing to be a career woman like that and have children. It's selfish, right? You're putting yourself and your needs and your wants and your dreams above your kids. Because now they're going to be the ones that suffer when you're going through all these bullshit like lawsuits and stuff. I think if you reach a certain level of ambition as a woman, you really shouldn't have kids. That's just my opinion. If you get to a certain level, I think you forfeited. You need to eat and that's what we're seeing in society is all these women like running for Congress, becoming doctors, like doing all this stuff, and it's like, okay, either get a stay-at-home husband, which women aren't going to do, or don't have kids. But then you have women that want their cake and they eat it too. They want the rich husband, and they want to not have kids, and they want kids, and they want the career. So, and then they'll rub it in our face and say that they're doing it all. It's like, we know you're not, And I guess I can kind of speak to this as the daughter of a career woman. Like, I grew up with nannies, and yeah, it was terrible. I mean, like, my mom.
How terrible was it really though when you were rich?
Gave us with these. Look, my mom gave us with these random caretakers that would just rotate in, rotate out, and it's like you either hate the caretaker, or you love the caretaker. And then if you love them, you have to. It's like your mother leaves every 2 years, and it was because my mom wanted to do it all. And then the kids suffer, right?
Yeah, somewhere in a ripped shirt. I like it.
Yeah, it's just
It's comfortable.
Yeah, the people that suffer are the kids. We have all these random people in and out of our
You
house.
guys know I wear my workout clothes
So, anyways, that's
when
my
I
trauma,
stream.
right?
I'm not gonna be in a suit.
But
I'm not
that's
doing
the
that.
problem. The
It
biggest
just
problem
doesn't
in
make
this
sense.
society isn't necessarily the
I'm
women.
not interviewing people.
It's the enabling of the women. It's the husbands that pay, it's the husbands that pay for the nanny. It's the husbands that say yes, 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 or that allow it. Like, I don't know. I think if a woman wants to be a bitch, you need to divorce her. I think if a woman,
Why she keep playing for
if a woman
highlighters?
is a bitch to you and is terrorizing you and the children, leave. Divorce her. Let her have. I want to see more men divorcing their wives that are being bitches, because women are never going to learn. The only thing women respond to is power. So I want to see more men leaving their children. Women keep calling men deadbeats anyway. Women will call active fathers fighting to be in the kids' lives a deadbeat. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, you might as well be one. Go be a deadbeat and leave the kids and tell her to deal with it and raise the kid herself. And if she wants your help, then to give you custody. That is the only thing that women respond to is power. If women are going to trash you online, trash them right back. Women have done
That's what I'm
shadier
saying.
stuff than men.
I believe.
So
Yeah.
if a woman is going online and
Too
saying all these
many
terrible
male
things about
celebrities
you,
play
do
it
back.
nice.
I think more men
No.
need to just be the villain. She's
Like,
going to make you the
Michael
villain
B.
anyway.
Jordan let that bitch Lori Harvey
Because
trash
these
him
women are
online
torturing
3
everybody
years
involved.
ago.
everybody
because
involved.
he wanted to be the bigger man. Didn't say
So,
anything.
anyways, I would love to see
I
increasing
would have
men
I would have
abandoning
talked
their kids
trash.
and leaving these kids and I would like to see a decrease in fathers and families enabling their daughters' behavior. So, I love you guys. Thanks for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.
Cellular aging may be happening faster than you think, and you can feel it. That could mean slower.
I'm gonna be watching random stuff. I mean, so if people have any requests for me to watch anything particular, you can let me know, or you just want to hold a conversation with me. Otherwise, I'm just gonna be watching random stuff that pique my interest.
Back to school is back, and with Walmart's must-haves, you can check off everything on their list. Even a hunch's backpack? You tell me.
Sometimes I'll watch something with a certain theme, like martial arts. I'll watch like
All at Walmart prices?
just a bunch of
Knowledge is power.
martial arts related content, or I'll watch a bunch of Black Manosphere related content, or Passport Bro related content, or comic book related content. It just depends on what mood. And other times, like now, I'll just watch random stuff.
Of all the European imperial powers, the Dutch were one of the most successful, exploring and discovering lands unknown to Europeans, establishing lucrative trading networks, as well as creating a long-lasting colonial empire across many continents. The building of said globe-spanning empire came at the same time as many of its neighbouring rivals were doing the same. However, by the time of the Berlin Conference in the 1880s, when the Europeans were turning their full attention to the division and colonisation of Africa, the Dutch were essentially nowhere to be seen, and after all was said and done, their territory in Africa was, well, non-existent. Which raises the question, why didn't the Dutch also take part in the scramble for Africa? Why didn't the Netherlands set up colonies there? Now, I can already hear some of you shouting in the comments about the fact that whilst the Dutch didn't take part in the scramble for Africa, they did of course grab some of it for themselves beforehand. This was done in the mid-17th century when the V.O.C., the Dutch East India Company, took control of the Cape of Good Hope here, the purpose of the latter being to establish a midpoint between the Netherlands and Europe and its colonial holdings in East Asia. Over the following century, the Dutch Empire grew in size and Cape Colony did too. Now, there were growing tensions between the Dutch East India Company and the settlers there over what rights and freedoms those living in Cape Colony had. Well, the Dutch and European settlers who lived there, that is. The slaves, not so much. Grumblings aside, the colony steadily grew in territory and population, much to the annoyance of those living nearby, and by the late 18th century, Dutch holdings in Africa were well established and had the largest footprint of any European power on the continent. So what changed over the next 90 years that meant that not only did the Dutch lose what they already had in Africa, but also meant that they would never return to the continent? Well, the main reason was France, sort of. Or more accurately, it was the French Revolution and the instability that spread across Europe in its wake. However, in the lead up to Louis XVI's departure from politics, the Dutch had been in a bit of a period of decline. So one of the Dutch secrets to success had been its ability to better finance its overseas expansion and its wars versus its rivals. But as the other European empires grew in size and population, the Dutch weren't as able to keep up. And other states, notably England, whose king had been ousted from power by the Dutch stadtholder William III, who was crowned King William also III, was now able to financially compete. The two were thus closely aligned after this, but England's empire wealth and resources grew at a pace that was simply too fast for the Dutch. And England, later Britain, soon became the primary naval and commercial power in Europe. The 18th century also saw the Dutch Republic become much more unstable, and periods of poor rule and defeat in important wars led to major upheavals there. William IV, the Prince of Orange, rose to power as the revived stadtholder in 1747 and sought to halt the decline and return the country to glory. Unfortunately, he died in 1751 because I assume he thought that leaving a topper in charge would be hilarious. The years following saw the Netherlands decline further, due to corruption, internal squabbling, and its rivals continuing to grow at a faster pace. And in the 1770s, when Britain's North American colonies revolted, the Dutch wanted to maintain their trade links there. The British were less keen on this and wanted to make sure that the Dutch weren't supplying the American rebels with weapons on behalf of France. When the Netherlands made it clear that it was going to join a Russian-led naval alliance to stop this from happening, the British declared war. Now, you think that with Britain fighting against the rebels, the French and also the Spanish, that the Dutch would have an easy time, but fun fact, no. The Dutch Republic did not do well, because its navy was too small to do anything, thereby leaving the British free to attack Dutch colonies overseas. The Dutch had refused to join a formal alliance with the French and the Spanish, which meant that even though Britain lost the war against those, the French refused to support any of the Dutch demands, meaning that it was forced to sign a separate peace in 1784, one which led to the Dutch giving territory to Britain and making trade concessions too. After this loss, the Netherlands again became much more unstable, and revolts against the stadtholder soon erupted. These were quickly suppressed with help from the Prussians, but the resentment still remained, meaning that when the French Revolution began shortly afterwards, the Netherlands was yet again destabilised. Dutch leadership weren't keen on these revolutionary ideals and so joined an anti-French coalition to restore the French monarchy and return things to normal. This did not go to plan, and the French were soon victorious, having invaded the Netherlands and with the help of the formerly suppressed revolutionaries, overthrew the stadtholder and declared the birth of the Batavian Republic. This
Back to school is back, and with Walmart's must-haves, you can check off everything on their list.
Even a huntress backpack?
You tell me. With a fit this sharp, they can cut the lunch line.
All this?
All at Walmart prices? Who knew?
Knowledge is power.
A rich life isn't a straight line to a destination on the horizon. Sometimes it takes an unexpected turn with detours, new possibilities, and even another passenger or three. And with 100 years of navigating ups and downs, you can count on us to help guide you through it all. Because life is a winding path, made rich by the people you walk it with. Edward Jones.
Homes AI, the first home search you can actually talk to. All you have to do is ask. Only on homes.com.
Hi. Ready for an ultra?
Racing for an ultra?
Don't forget, there's ultras on the line. I didn't.
This put the Dutch firmly in the French camp, and thus against Britain, who didn't want the Dutch Empire's resources to aid the French, and so took what it could, including the Dutch Cape Colony. Britain returned it after making peace with France, but when Napoleon happened, the British conquered it again, and during this time the Netherlands was ruled as a puppet state and also briefly annexed into France. Prior to Napoleon's defeat, the great powers had agreed that William VI, the Prince of Orange, would become the king of a much larger United Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the British felt that giving William a larger state meant that he wouldn't mind losing some of his overseas holdings. He did, of course, but the British didn't care, and in 1814 they signed a treaty acknowledging that Britain would keep these. This notably included Cape Colony, thereby ending the largest Dutch settlement on the continent, but it's okay because they still have the Gold Coast. The next half a century was a mixed bag for the Netherlands. Internal divisions meant that a mere 15 years after its formation, the United Kingdom of the Netherlands split into two, becoming the Kingdom of the Netherlands in union with Luxembourg and the now independent Kingdom of Belgium. It wasn't all bad though, because the Dutch took this time to modernise their economy and increase their income from the Dutch East Indies, which meant that the country would soon get a lot richer. The Dutch were expanding their holdings in Southeast Asia at this time, where their main competition was the British. In 1871, the Dutch agreed to cede the Dutch Gold Coast to Britain in return for it recognising its recent gains in Asia, and an acknowledgement in the Netherlands' interests in these parts too. And with this, the Netherlands had ended its over 250-year rule there and withdrawn from Africa entirely. It wasn't long after this until the near general desire amongst the European great powers to conquer Africa really kicked off. In order to lay the ground rules and hopefully prevent a major war, Otto von Bismarck, the German Chancellor, called the Berlin Conference to get the major powers on board. The conference was attended by all of these European states and the US, and the Netherlands, despite no longer having any formal holdings in Africa, wanted to protect its trade interests along the west coast and in particular in the region of the Congo, which King Leopold II of Belgium had truly put himself in a position to be awarded by the great powers, providing everyone could trade there. Now you'd think that the Dutch, who had previous experience there and also currently had an empire of their own, would have been a better candidate for this. However, the reason why the Netherlands not only wasn't awarded the Congo or even a small part of it was because Dutch leadership simply wasn't interested in colonising Africa, and what little interests it had there were outweighed by the potential downsides. You see, the Dutch government's primary imperial focus was the islands of Southeast Asia, the conquest and pacification of which was already difficult enough. In fact, one of the reasons why the Netherlands handed over the Gold Coast to Britain was the British protest over the Dutch taking the people there to fight in their wars of colonial expansion, which didn't seem very voluntary to those in London and thus looked suspiciously like a form of enslavement. And so, given that the Dutch could no longer take African soldiers to fight their wars, there was very little there to interest them, save of course for their historical connection to the Dutch descendants living in British Cape Colony. Now, whilst there was a powerful cultural connection with the Boers, the Dutch knew that settling anywhere near the southern tip of Africa was just asking for trouble. And despite the simmering imperial rivalry between the two, Britain was a major trading partner with a similar system of government and a nation which the Dutch saw as their most likely ally should another major European war break out, which meant that upsetting them wasn't the best idea. Furthermore, the ever-growing Dutch East Indies were a much greater source of wealth for Amsterdam than Africa could have ever been. To begin, it had an absolutely massive population that the Dutch could make use of. To put just how big it was into perspective, the population there was roughly 32 million people at this point, which was larger than the populations of all the other European colonial empires combined, barring Britain's, of course. The Dutch East Indies were also perfect for growing lucrative cash crops and was also situated along important sea routes. The Dutch government also knew that it holding onto these islands was seen as the best case scenario by the other European powers, who much preferred the wealth of these islands going to the Netherlands instead of any of their rivals. And so, instead of laying claim to any section of Africa and potentially upsetting any of the great powers, the Dutch agreed to the rules laid down at the Berlin Conference and opted for a policy of supporting Britain and Belgium's claims there, believing that those two would be much more likely to give them access to markets which would increase the Netherlands' already growing wealth. Within 20 years, the vast majority of Africa had been claimed, whilst the Dutch had made further inroads into Southeast Asia, a decision which, whilst in some respects abandoning their past connections to Africa, was economically and politically very beneficial for the Netherlands, and one which helped in keeping the country out of war for the next 50 years. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks to my patrons, James Bizanet, Sky Chappelle, Kartuitska, Marvin Kassow, Ryan Hockey, Gustav Swan, Anthony Beckett, Captain Psydog, Rod D. Martin, A.F. Firefly, Robert C. Perkins, Alex Schwinn, Andy McGeehee, The McWhopper, Spencer Lightfoot, The Flying Deutschland, Commun Yoon, Respectable Level of Chaos, Yuduan Wang, Shuenin, Paul H., Castle Bravo, Michael Holt.
Now on to something else random.
Get those flu shots.
Dealing with A Song of Ice and Fire, particularly House of the Dragon,
In your corner.
and the
Whenever
book
you need us
to,
most.
from which it came, Fire and Blood, which is a prequel to A Song of Ice and Fire.
How did you do all that? Who are the Winter Wolves? Where did they come from and why? What battles did they fight? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher, then this is the place for you. Welcome. This is another collaboration with the wonderful History of Westeros. Please do check out their podcast and YouTube channel. Oh, and obviously there might be spoilers here for House of the Dragon, depending on how much of it you've seen and how close to the books the rest of the show is. There is an ancient, though sad and noble, tradition in the north, very possibly dating as far back as the start of seasons being out of balance. If winters linger long enough, whenever it's clear there's not enough food for everyone, the older men announce that they will go hunting. In truth, they are not looking to add food, but rather subtract a mouth that needs feeding. Everyone knows that there is no game to be had in the depths of winter. They walk out into the cold and don't return unless they somehow miraculously survive until spring arrives. They bravely sacrifice the few years they have left to ensure decades of life for the young, while setting an example as to what's expected of those they leave behind. The North remembers, especially sacrifices such as these. But while it is brave to die in winter, more songs are sung of those who die in battle. In the year 130 A.C., winter came to Westeros after 5 years of summer, and another generation of greybeards faced the inevitable, or would have, were it not for civil war racking the continent of Westeros, the Dance of the Dragons. Rhaenyra called for support, and Prince Jacaerys flew to Winterfell to facilitate the North's contribution. Cregan Stark, the young Lord of Winterfell, could not send a host in the midst of harvest season. That decision would doom more souls to starvation than the war could ever claim, but he could still help. So, while the North prepared for a long winter, he sent his fiercest veterans, men who would not have partaken of the harvest in any case, because they would have gone hunting when the snow started to fall, men whose bodies would have otherwise been found after the spring thaw, if they were found at all. 2,000 men answered the call. They wore shaggy skins and old mail, wielding axes, mauls, spiked maces, and ancient iron swords. Men not intending to return leave their best weapons for their families. The Greybeards were all a horse, and they called themselves the Winter Wolves. Yet they were not led by a Stark, but by Roderick Dustin, the Lord of Barroton, also known as Roddy the Ruin. After gathering his men, they headed south with haste to join the campaigns already playing out in the Riverlands. Cregan's larger force would head out once the harvest was safely in. The Winter Wolves rode down the causeway and arrived at the Twins. House Frey were also allied to Queen Rhaenyra, so allowed them to cross quickly to join their allies in the field. They stopped just long enough for Roddy the Ruin to famously utter on behalf of his men, "We have come to die for the Dragon Queen." They also stopped long enough to pick up 200 knights and 600 footmen from the Freys, before being joined later by 300 Blackwood archers under Red Rob Rivers. When they finally arrived at the war on the western shore of the God's Eye Lake, they found their allies, the Riverlords, in a strong position. The Westerlands army had been diminished already, but had dug in on the lakeshore. The water to their back, with the other three sides guarded by pikemen stiffened with fortifications. Normally, the Riverlords could have just waited. The Westermen would eventually run short of supplies, but they were still very close to Harrenhal and Vagar, who would surely soon come to investigate, which would obviously alter the prospects of the battle completely. The only option was a frontal assault against the dug-in pikemen, which would probably be successful, but only at great cost. None of the river lords were eager to send their own men first, but Roddy the Ruin is said to have begged the other lords for the honour. They had come to die, after all. The river lords wisely accepted. It was the Winter Wolves' first battle of the war, a headlong charge into a wall of pikes and stakes and well-armoured soldiers. 2,000 old men leading the way against something like 20 to 30,000 Westermen. At dawn, they charged the Greens from all three sides, 5 separate times, breaking apart formations and wreaking general havoc, all the while instilling hopelessness in their opponents. Each time, the River Lords followed behind the Northerners and did what damage they could in the wake of the Winter Wolves' savage, repeated charges. The progress was gradual and extremely bloody, but each successive assault pushed the Greens back towards and eventually into the lake itself. The Western army must have been dismayed. The inexperienced among them hadn't been prepared for anything like this, and even their most experienced veterans had never faced foes that had no regard for even their own survival. As the charges mounted and their position grew ever worse, the men of the West had no choice but to stand, fight and die with the water splashing around their legs. The battle by the lakeshore became known as the Fish Feed, and it was the bloodiest battle of the Dance of the Dragons. 2/3 of the Winter Wolves were killed or wounded. Roddy the Ruin was among the latter, but still capable of leading his men. Quite the introduction to the war. As it turned out, they would have some time to recover. Criston Cole's army was marching in their direction, intent on making it to the Reach, and the Riverlords and the Winter Wolves, though, now changed tactics. Instead of another large battle, they engaged in guerrilla warfare against Cole's army. This was not the sort of campaign the Winter Wolves had ridden south for, but it was still warfare, and there were still foes to kill. The Kingmaker's army suffered night attacks, poisoned wells, scorched earth, and dead bodies arranged as if at dinner. Eventually, they trapped Sir Criston in a valley, and he called for parley. He asked for his men's lives, pointing out that many of the Queen's men could avoid death by taking prisoners. But Roddy the Ruin laughed and said, "That's why we come. Winter's here. Time for us to go. No better way to die than sword in hand." The Kingmaker was then shot down by Red Rob and 2 of his men, and Roddy sounded the charge. Once again, he and the remaining Winter Wolves were in the vanguard, but instead of the stout resistance they met at the Fish Feed, the Butcher's Ball was a slaughter of men who had lost the will to fight, and were outnumbered and overmatched besides.
Figuring out which credit card to use shouldn't feel complicated. Cards Optimizer from Intuit Credit Card shows you the right card to use for every purchase, so you can
I need to
unlock
get
the
some more
rewards
water.
you deserve. Download the app
By the
to
way,
get started.
I'm usually not this clean shaven on a Sunday, but I had already skipped 2 days of shaving, so I went ahead and just cleaned it up on a Sunday, which I usually don't do. 'Cause the thing is, my facial hair grows so slowly. I always skip a day, but by the second day, there's usually stubble, so I shave it.
That's cute.
But
It's
if I have nothing to
definitely
do,
pink.
I can skip
You
2
know,
days.
you don't have to
I
worry
always
if you
skip
don't
at
want
least
to.
1 day,
I just want to feel like
but I
my-
usually can skip. But sometimes I skip 2 days if I'm not doing anything, so it doesn't matter. But 3 days, but 2 days is the limit. By the 3rd day, I need to shave.
Instead of Sir Criston joining his army to Lord
Which
Ormond
meant, I went,
Hightower's, the Winter Wolves marched with the Riverlords to
Thursday,
Tumbleton
Friday, and
strength.
Saturday without a
They
shave.
beat
So.
the Reach host there
No,
alongside other
it was
lords
actually
from the
about 4
Crown
days.
Lands. The
Since
majority
Wednesday.
of their army was then positioned on the Rose Road, blocking the way to Tumbleton. I've got into this on my video about Tumbleton. The remaining Winter Wolves were placed inside the town, waiting for an opportune moment to charge once again. They didn't have to wait long. Lord Ormond's host ably defeated the Queen's army, who broke and ran for what safety they could find behind Tumbleton's meagre walls. Lord Ormond's army advanced quickly, despite taking fire from the walls. With the Hightower heavy horse engaged and most of the fleeing army inside the walls, Roddy the Ruin chose this moment to charge. The winter wolves poured out of a small postern gate on the side of the town and swept around Lord Ormond's left flank, aiming directly for his banner. The winter wolves aimed to bite the proverbial head off of the snake. To succeed, they would have to fight through many times their own number, and even if they succeeded, they would be surrounded and cut down. For that reason, it is generally not a strategy that one expects. The winter wolves had timing, surprise, and momentum on their side, and more importantly, they were not just expecting, but aiming to die. They were the only men on the field who did not want to go home to their wives and children after the battle, and they used it to their advantage in a way no one saw coming. With Roddy at the head, the winter wolves continued to hurtle forward with reckless abandon. Experienced knights, veterans of dozens of battles, did not quite know what to do. The ruin looked every bit his name as he neared his target. Helm cracked, shield splintered, covered in blood, but most of it from the enemy. Sir Brynden Hightower, the foremost knight in Oldtown, blocked Roddy's charge towards Lord Ormond and struck first. His long axe flashed, and just like that, Lord Roderick's shield arm was separated from his shoulder. Perhaps Sir Brynden paused, waiting for his foe to fall, or looked to the next winter wolf behind Lord Roderick, but somehow Roddy wasn't slowed. As if unable or unwilling to feel his wounds, his counterstroke slew Sir Brynden. Lord Ormond Hightower most likely saw his cousin fall, and in disbelief watched as the one-armed, blood-drunk Lord of Barrington advanced on him, and slew him as well. Roddy himself passed out shortly after and never woke again. There are countless ways to describe this moment, and that's exactly what the singers did, we're told. A single wolf with one arm brought down two towers. The relatively small Barrington defeated Oldtown, the second largest city in Westeros. This legendary moment needed no embellishment. It stood on its own, and it was certainly memorialized in both history and song. But the impact on the war itself was almost as important. Ormond Hightower had the power, the money, the army, and given we suspect him most of all as the one who turned the two betrayers, Ulf and Hugh, he had a shout of winning the war itself for his candidate Darren, but the Winter Wolves made certain that he never got that chance. Remember that some of Rhaenyra's top advisors suggested peace negotiations after Lord Ormond's first victory early in the war, long before Tumbleton. Fire and Blood itself calls Ormond and his host Rhaenyra's biggest threat, more so even than Aemond and Vhagar. This turned the tide of the war, or stopped it at least. Without Ormond Hightower's leadership, the Hightower army turned on itself until the Second Battle of Tumbleton finished the affair. As an addendum to this, Cregan Stark did eventually march southwards as promised with another northern army. It was much larger than the Winter Wolves, but it never fought a battle. The South saw what 2,000 Winter Wolves had done and had no desire to see what 10,000 younger Northmen could do. Rhaenyra's greatest...
I know, that's right. The North remembers, bitches.
But somehow Roddy wasn't slowed. As if unable or unwilling to feel his wounds, his counterstroke slew Sir Brynden. Lord Ormond Hightower most likely saw his cousin fall, and in disbelief watched as the one-armed, blood-drunk Lord of Barrington advanced on him, and slew him as well. Roddy himself passed out shortly after and never woke again. There are countless ways to describe this moment, and that's exactly what the singers did, we're told. A single wolf with one arm brought down two towers. The relatively small Barrington defeated Oldtown, the second largest city in Westeros. This legendary moment needed no embellishment. It stood on its own, and it was certainly memorialized in both history and song. But the impact on the war itself was almost as important. Ormond Hightower had the power, the money, the army, and given we suspect him...
Let me go back a little bit more.
Expecting, but aiming to die. They were the only men on the field who did not want to go home to their wives and children after the battle, and they used it to their advantage in a way no one saw coming. With Roddy at the head, the Winter Wolves continued to hurtle forward with reckless abandon. Experienced knights, veterans of dozens of battles, did not quite know what to do. The ruin looked every bit his name as he neared his target. Helm cracked, shield splintered, covered in blood, but most of it from the enemy. Sir Brynden Hightower, the foremost knight in Oldtown, blocked Roddy's charge towards Lord Ormond and struck first. His long axe flashed, and just like that, Lord Roderick's shield arm was separated from his shoulder. Perhaps Sir Brynden paused, waiting for his foe to fall, or looked to the next winter wolf behind Lord Roderick, but somehow Roddy wasn't slowed. As if unable or unwilling to feel his wounds, his counterstroke slew Sir Brynden. Lord Ormond Hightower most likely saw his cousin fall, and in disbelief...
Oh, okay. Skipping ahead.
Ormond Hightower's leadership, the Hightower army turned on itself until the Second Battle of Tumbleton.
Okay.
Men could do. Rhaenyra's greatest threat wasn't ended by Prince Daemon, a dragon, nor even one of her high lords. It was ended by old men from the north who came south to die for a queen that they never knew. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos, please click on the link on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.
Good stuff. Good stuff. That's a good channel if you want to watch stuff that's based on Lord of the Rings, Song of Ice and Fire, and also what was that show that Henry Cavill was in? I never watched it because I never was into the books, but I know it's very popular with people until they messed it up. They're really milking the Lion King, but this looks kind of cool. It's actual lions, no CGI.
Who is Eärendil, one of the most mythical and important characters in Tolkien's Legendarium? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire and The Witcher, this is the place for you. Welcome. There are many key turning points in the history of Ardor and Middle-earth, but perhaps the most pivotal was the shift from the Elder Days to the Second Age of Middle-earth. Morgoth, Middle-earth's greatest foe, was defeated. The world itself literally reshaped. The Valar and the Undying Lands removed from that physical plane, and a new star took its place in the sky. Everything changed. The catalyst for all of this was Eärendil. Though starting as a denizen of Middle-earth, he ended it among the stars. The age of legend and myth was passing. The dawn of the dominion of man was now fast approaching. Eärendil represents the hinge, remembered as a star in the sky, as mythological a fate as you can imagine, while his sons Elrond and Elros become two of the most important figures of the age to come. So, who was Eärendil? What was his legend? It's probably useful to start by acknowledging that Eärendil as a character actually predates any of Tolkien's Middle-earth stories. During the first year or so of the First World War, in which Tolkien served, he wrote 4 poems about this character, Eärendil, his travels, his coming to Valinor, the raising of his ship into the sky, and his eternal travel thereafter on the edges of the world. All very mythical, without a clear world setting or wider plot. Tolkien openly admitted that his writing a couple of years later of what became collected in the Book of Lost Tales, the foundation of his entire legendarium, was inspired by him trying to find out, in his words, the story of Eärendil and his world. Eärendil was born towards the end of the First Age of Middle-earth, the only son of Tuor, a human hero, and Idril, the daughter of the Elf King of Gondolin, so a half-elf. Middle-earth at that time was a dark and dangerous place. Morgoth and his forces were overrunning the land. Orcs, Balrogs, dragons, and one by one the major strongholds of the elves and men were being destroyed. Gondolin, the hidden city, was the last. It took Morgoth a long time to even discover where it was, but when he did, he unleashed his fury on it, and it too fell. Eärendil was just 7 years old when his home and most of the people he knew were burned and destroyed before his eyes. Gondolin, the hidden city, fell to Morgoth's forces. Eärendil himself was very nearly killed by Maeglin, the elf who had betrayed Gondolin to Morgoth, and was ushered to safety through secret tunnels and through mountain passes, leaving everything he had ever known behind him. His parents escaped with him, but so many others died. It was quite a traumatic start to life for Eärendil. Eärendil eventually found shelter in Arvenian on the coast and rose to become leader of the people there and a friend of Círdan the shipwright. And perhaps most importantly for him, he fell in love and married Elwing. Elwing probably deserves a video of her own, such a great character she is. Suffice to say here that she was a pretty indomitable person and from legendary heritage herself. She was the daughter of Dior, son of Beren and Luthien, who were the subject of one of Tolkien's great stories of the First Age, Beren being a human and Luthien an elf, and half Maya, meaning that Elwing, like Eärendil, was half-elven. So their marriage brought together the two half-elven strands of the First Age. It also brought together ancestry from 3 of the noble houses of the Edain men, and of course Amaya in Melian, Luthien's mother. Eärendil and Elwing lived happily for a short time in Arvenian and had twin sons, Elrond and Elros. Yes, that Elrond and that Elros. We'll come back to them later. Because although Eärendil was happy, there was sadness there too, because around the time of his marriage, so once he was grown up and settled, his parents Tuor and Idril got in a boat and headed west without providing much of an explanation. We don't know for sure what happened to them, but this is obviously the tragedy of elf-human relations. Tuor had grown old, and Idril hadn't, so they wanted to do something to stay together. Trying to get to Valinor must have seemed like a reasonable option. And at an even more basic level, Tuor and Eärendil both had the sea longing awakened in them while living on the coast. They both yearned for sea, like Legolas did at the end of The Lord of the Rings. Eärendil went to look for his parents in a ship he built with Círdan, called the Vingilot, but to no avail. Although, as it happened, he was actually never to set foot in Middle-earth again. Things in Middle-earth were getting worse. Morgoth's forces were pushing across the land, and on top of that, the elves were basically in a civil war, the sons of Fëanor against everyone else. To understand what happened then does require a little bit of wider backstory, because the First Age is full of tragedies, and many of them surround the Silmarils, 3 gems of great beauty that possessed the last light of the 2 trees of Valinor. Beren and Luthien, Elwing's grandparents, had managed to steal one of these from Morgoth, and Elwing now had possession of it. Although Beren and Luthien had taken it fair and square from Morgoth, he had stolen it much earlier from the legendary Fëanor, and Fëanor's sons had sworn an oath to reclaim them all. So, to come back to Eärendil and Elwing, who he had left behind while he sailed off looking for his parents, their home of Arvenian came under attack in the end not from Morgoth, but from Fëanor's sons, seeking the Silmaril that Elwing had. In truth, the outcome was probably the same regardless of who attacked. The settlement was destroyed, and Elwing, with the Silmaril, had to decide what to do. Her husband, Eärendil, remember, was out to sea at the time. Rather than give herself or the Silmaril up to Fëanor's sons, Elwing decided to throw herself into the sea, which sounds rather dramatic, but let's pick up the story in the Silmarillion. Ulmo, the Valar responsible for the sea, bore up Elwing out of the waves, and he gave her the likeness of a great white bird, and upon her breast there shone as a star the Silmaril, as she flew over the water to seek Eärendil, her beloved. On a time of night, Eärendil, at the helm of his ship, saw her come towards him as a white cloud exceeding swift beneath the moon, as a star over the sea moving in strange courses, a pale flame on wings of storm. And
I
it
read
is
the
so
Silmarillion, by the
that
way,
she fell from the air upon the timbers of Vingalot in a swoon,
and
nigh
the Book of
unto
Lost
death
Tales.
for the urgency of her speed. And Eärendil took her to his bosom, but in the morning, with marvelling eyes, he beheld his wife in her own form beside him, with her hair upon his face, and she slept. Eärendil realized then that the elves and humans of Middle-earth would never be able to prevail against Morgoth and their own infighting. Their only hope against darkness was for him to throw himself at the mercy of the Valar and beg their mercy and intervention. Mercy was needed because what Eärendil did was going against the express order of the Valar. Him setting foot in the Undying Lands like that, uninvited, was punishable by death. But Eärendil was willing to risk it, not for his own sake, but to plead on behalf of the elves and humans of Middle-earth. And that selflessness, willing to die to save others, seems to have been what won the day. For the Valar heard his pleas and were moved. A great host set forth to Middle-earth, and the War of Wrath began. Eärendil was a part of this host, though in a way he surely could never have expected. The Valar blessed his ship, the Vingalot, filled it with a shining white light, made it a flying ship, and sent him into battle alongside the great eagles. He wore the Silmaril on his brow to guide the way, and he and the eagles defeated the great dragon Ancalagon the Black, the largest and fiercest dragon ever. After that, he and Elwing were given a choice as to whether to be reckoned among humans or elves, much like Elrond and Arwen had later. Elwing chose elf, and although Eärendil would perhaps have preferred to be human, he chose elf too, in order not to be parted from Elwing. And after that, the Valar decided to raise Elwing's Silmaril as a new star, a light in the sky that may be a sign of hope to humans and elves alike. And Eärendil was given the task of steering that star through the sky with his sky ship. We read in the Silmarillion that fair and marvellous was that vessel made, and it was filled with a wavering flame, pure and bright, and Eärendil the mariner sat at the helm, glistening with dust of elven gems, and the Silmaril was bound upon his brow. Far he journeyed in that ship, even into the starless voids, but most often was he seen at morning or at evening, glimmering in sunrise or sunset, as he came back to Valinor from voyages beyond the confines of the world.
You know, I always say if you have time to scroll, you have time for a call.
I like that.
I'm great. How are you, man?
Hey, Mimi.
I just want to hear people's conversations, dude. You're not slick. You're not slick.
I miss you too. Nice to meet you. I love you. Bye.
At AT&T, we guarantee your network. If there's an outage, we credit your bill. Love you guys.
What does it take to become a king? A cub named Keo is about to find out. In this kingdom, everything the light touches.
Not gonna lie, I kind of want to watch this.
One day, he is.
Oh, this now streaming on Disney Plus? Yeah,
Star rose unlooked for, glittering and bright, and the people of Middle-earth beheld it from afar and wondered, and they took it for a sign and called it Gil Estel, the star of high hope. And it is through this star that Eärendil's influence was still felt in Middle-earth in the ages to come. The new island continent of Numenor was created, and the fledgling Numenorians were guided there by following that star. Indeed, the Numenorians' own name for their own new land was Elena, which means starwards. And of course, the king of that new people was Elros, Eärendil's son. The choice of whether to be counted a human or elf was passed on to his sons, and Elros chose to be a man. Elrond, of course, chose to be counted as an elf, though still was known as the half-elven. And there is one more influence Eärendil and his star had thousands of years later in The Lord of the Rings. Galadriel's gift to Frodo was light from that star caught in the file of Galadriel, for when they were in the darkest of places. This is what happened when Frodo and Sam came up against Shelob. Slowly, Frodo's hand went to his bosom, and slowly he held aloft the file of Galadriel. For a moment, it glimmered, faint as a rising star struggling in heavy earthward mists, and then, as its power waxed and hope grew in Frodo's mind, it began to burn and kindled to a silver flame, a minute heart of dazzling light, as though Eärendil had himself come down from the high sunset paths with the last Silmaril upon his brow. The darkness receded from it, until it seemed to shine in the centre of a globe of airy crystal, and the hand that held it sparkled with white fire. Holding the star aloft and the bright sword advanced, Frodo, the hobbit of the Shire, walked steadily down to meet the eyes. They wavered. Doubt came into them as the light approached. One by one, they dimmed, and slowly they drew back. No brightness so deadly had ever afflicted them before. From sun and moon and star they had been safe underground, but now a star had descended into the very earth. Still it approached, and the eyes began to quail. One by one they all went dark. They turned away, and a great bulk beyond the light's reach heaved its huge shadow in between. They were gone. Simply put, Eärendil and his star saved Frodo and Sam from Shelob. Eärendil is the hinge between the mythical elder days and the younger days of the Second and Third Ages. His children, Elrond and Elros, were giants of those ages, and his star guided and saved people and gave hope throughout millennia. But Eärendil himself belongs to the elder days. His story is mythological. His ascent to the heavens is reminiscent of Helios, driving the sun across the sky in Greek mythology, and many other ancient understandings of the stars. We are to look to the stars and remember him. Indeed, to Tolkien, Eärendil's legacy is with us, still, in our world. He viewed his own sub-creation of Middle-earth as our own world, not in a different period of time, but in a different stage of imagination. And one of the few things that he explicitly talks about as crossing over is Eärendil's star. For that star is our Venus. Look up to the night sky at dawn or dusk, and you will see it.
The morning star
After
and the
the
evening
sun
star
and
is
moon,
actually
it is
Venus.
the brightest point of light in the evening or morning sky. A guide to sailors and a light in the dark. Eärendil's star. A sign of
Oh, no,
hope
I didn't read
for
the
all.
Book of Lost Tales. I read the Unfinished Tales.
If you'd like to see more
Might
Lord of the
need to
Rings
read
videos,
the Lost Book
please
of
click on
Tales
the
1
link
and the
on
Lost
the
Book
left
of
of your
Tales
screen.
2.
Or if you'd like to support the channel, thank you. There's a link
Might
to my
have to read
Patreon
those.
page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.
That's good. That was good. I like that.
Ah, Chablis.
I can't believe it's just coffee. Without a capsule.
get all these recommended channels that I don't want to watch? Um,
Everyone deserves a better, healthier energy.
Not in this instance, there was again no,
And that's
no
exactly the
conversation with anyone.
Jason Erday was found dead at the age of 41. And for those who don't know who he was a Cambridge professor and fast rising media star until his world collapsed over the summer. In July, there were credible plagiarism accusations that expanded into journalists questioning his biographical claims, which were incredible. He claimed to have run 600 miles in 6 days, which is something only the most elite ultra runners have done. Cambridge opened an investigation on August 5th, and Erday resigned the same day. His autobiography, which many think contained bold falsehoods, was then published August 11th. Days later, he was found dead. What do you make of all this?
Well, apparently, I saw, not being on social media, I don't think I saw just how big a story this was. Apparently, this was just wall to wall. And in the UK, this was just completely dominated the news cycle. I was kind of even before he died. I mean, it was the coverage. I think we could imagine precipitated his suicide. I mean, it's the onus is really on Cambridge and the other institutional actors who covered for him. I think the BBC and other journalists probably played an ignominious role in this because they attacked his unmasking as a plagiarist and a fabulist as a symptom of racism. Right now, it didn't help that the philosopher at Cambridge, or the former fellow at Cambridge, who's a philosopher, has as his hobby horse, something like race realism. Right? He spends a lot of time thinking about intelligence differences between groups, and so the optics of that weren't great and understandably distracting. But it doesn't mean he was wrong about this case at all. It doesn't mean
there are intelligence differences between the races. That's been
plausible.
That's been so firmly established.
Cambridge believed this guy's claims about himself.
Psychometry. It's not even.
I mean, it just seems.
When people debate this, people
he claimed to
have no
not spoken a word until age
scientific
11,
psychology.
to not be able to read and write until age 18. Then he got a PhD.
You can debate why those
one
differences
of these
exist.
fake woke disciplines,
but those differences in intelligence exist between different ethnic
that's
groups
all
is a
about
fact.
Racial grievance.
Yeah. But I can see why that would be
it's all
distracting.
Intellectually, this whole area of every university is almost total bullshit. So there really needs to be a house cleaning there. But the fact that he was promoted as some kind of prodigy, given how crazy his self-representation was, is a sign of just how cultic and confused the left and left-leaning institutions have become. I mean, it's just a sign of the cancer having spread everywhere.
Why would Cambridge do this? Why would they not investigate? Why would they just take him at face value? Would they do this with anyone else, or is
they
special?
You can imagine they wouldn't do it with a Jew. I mean, it's just this is all anti-racism. This is Ibram X. Kendi, and the genius of that became fully formed in the brains of everyone left of center post George Floyd. Right. This is putting the BLM black square not only in your bio but in your brain. It's a cult. It's always been a cult. I mean, it's been obvious for about a decade now that this is what we're witnessing is the ramifications of a moral panic around race and social justice. They got engineered on the left, and in large measure, it gave us Trump and Trumpism, in my view, and I think it's just as culpable for the derangement of the right as the derangement of the right is. It's intolerable, and if we don't get our heads clear of its new variant, this far left, this socialist / communist alliance with Islamism, we're going to go for another round of right-wing ascendancy in America and elsewhere. So, I mean, to speak about Arde himself, I don't know whether he was just genuinely crazy or just a con artist. I mean, you can't really put much emphasis on
Could
the
be a little bit
artist
of
part
both.
that. I mean, again, these lies should not have been believable by anyone.
He was
but,
obviously
I mean, he might have had genuine
he was
mental illness.
obviously
I don't
a
know,
bit mentally
but
unhinged.
So he's some kind of
But
George
some of the
Santos
stuff he was
character
doing was
or
probably
something.
intentionally deceitful.
It's a totally bizarre story, but again, whatever his sins as a person or his deficits as a person, again, I don't know. The onus is totally on Cambridge and everyone who believed this. This is just incredible.
But are you putting the onus on Cambridge because they just didn't ask questions, or because they used him to propel him to the top so that they could tell a nice story about a guy like this?
They're an institution that has become totally corrupt in its desperation to believe that somebody who checks all the identitarian boxes is some kind of woke superhero, right? So these are claims that would not have been believed about anyone else. I mean, just none of this passes the laugh test. It's just again, it's I mean, you're in the presence of a lunatic who's making these claims about himself, right? I mean, you might as well have said that he used to be able to fly but gave it up because he got bored, right? I mean, it's just it's madness. So well, I don't know what to make of the fact that they believed all this, but then when they double down and triple down and castigate anyone who doubts this stuff as a racist, motivated by bad motives, but by definition, how else could what other reason could you possibly have for doubting the gifts of this man with dreadlocks? I mean, again, the social justice hysteria around race that has occurred in the last decade has been almost totally dishonest. Almost, I mean, this is the Jussie Smoletification of everything, right? And Cambridge and the BBC,
Juicy
and the New York
Smollett.
Times, and all these.
I'm never
all the
gonna
most
forget
trusted
that. Chris Rock.
institutions are
No, that wasn't Chris
main
Rock. That
participants
was
in it. They've been
Dave
activated
Chappelle.
and
That was Dave
you know,
Chappelle. Juicy Smollett.
baffled by
Wait, was that Chris
by
Rock
the
or was
far
that?
left.
'Cause they were kind of tag
willingly.
teaming throughout
And
the
it's this
late-
again the spell. I'm convinced that the spell
late
is in the process of
2010s,
breaking.
early
It's been-
2020s,
I don't think
as far
we're
as
anywhere
having
near
like
peak woke,
hit
but this
comedy specials
recent
on Netflix.
variant of it with the DSA among Democrats and the
I think that was
confusion there
Chappelle, but I can't remember if that
take the
was
American
Chappelle or
context.
that was
Really
Chris
has
Rock.
me worried
Juicy
about
Smollett.
the next
He's a
2 years.
Jussie Smollification of
our
everything.
politics.
And maybe when the Gulf states said they wouldn't send their students or whatever it was to
Yeah, the UAE.
universities, or maybe they meant the woke left too. These are also the problems. And I also want to touch on the failure of institutions. I want to talk to you about Fauci in a minute.
It's time to rip off their mask and expose big fintech for who they truly are.
Anyway, that's it for me. Since I didn't have anyone to talk to, so I just watched the videos and we'll see. I'll be making up some long form content very soon. Other than that, it's a wrap. Peace.